Hello. Today we're going to read one of the best books ever, Patricia Polacco's Thank You, Mr. Falker. And I want you to know that this is very relevant because this week is Teacher Appreciation Week. And I sure hope that you have sent a message or some kindness to your teacher and thanked him or her for all their hard work because we have the greatest teachers ever, and we sure want to make sure that they feel the love. So, Teacher Appreciation Week, let's make sure that we honor them. But this is Patricia Polacco. Thank you, Mr. Falker, and it was published by Babushka Inc. in 1998, and it looks like it is Philom Philomol Books. The grandpa held the jar of honey so that all the family could see, then dipped a ladle into it and drizzled honey on the cover of a small book. The little girl had just turned 5. "Stand up, little one," he cooed. "I did this for your mother, your uncles, your older brother, and now you." Then he handed the book to her. "Taste." She dipped her finger into the honey and put it into her mouth. "What is that taste?" Grandma asked. The little girl answered, "Sweet." Then all the family said in a single voice, "Yes, and so is knowledge." But knowledge is like the bee that made the sweet honey. You have to chase it through the pages of a book. The little girl knew that the promise to read was at last hers. Soon she was going to learn to read. And most of you already know how to read. Here she is. This is the ladle. It's like a little has a handle, and the honey is dripped on it on the book. Okay, and we usually wouldn't put honey on a book. That would be a weird thing to do, but for the story, that's what happened. Trisha, the little girl in the family, grew up loving books. Her school teacher mother read to her every night. How many of you have moms and dads who read to you every night? I hope so. Her redheaded brother brought his books home from school and shared them. And whenever she visited the family farm, her grandmother and grandfather read to her by the stone fireplace. When she turned 5 and went to kindergarten, most of all she hoped to read. Each day she saw the kids in the first grade across the hall reading, and before the year was over, some of the kids in her own class began to read. Not Trisha. Still, she loved being at school because she could draw. The other kids would crowd around her and watch her do her magic with crayons. "In first grade, you'll learn to read," her brother said. So here they are. They're watching Trisha, and she is coloring, drawing. She wants to read. Now, I'm going to give you a little teaser here. This person's author's name, Patricia Polacco. If you look, you take the P and the A off, Trisha. Wonder what that's all about. In her first grade, Trisha sat in a circle with other kids. They were all holding Our Neighborhood, their first reader, sounding out letters and words. She said, "Buh, buh, boy, boy," and "la, la, look." The teacher smiled at them when they put all the sounds together and got a word. But when Trisha looked at the page, all she saw were wiggly shapes. And when she tried to sound out words, the other kids laughed at her. "Trisha, what are you looking at in that book?" they'd say. "I'm reading," she'd say back to them. But her teacher would move on to the next person. Always when it was her turn to read, her teacher had to help her with every single word. And while the other kids moved up into the second reader and the third reader, she stayed on Our Neighborhood. Trisha began to feel different. She began to feel dumb. Okay, here she is. She's struggling with her reading. Other kids are reading right along. I bet sometimes reading's hard for all of us, for some of you. And you know what? The best thing you can do is keep working at it, okay? The harder the words got for the little girl, the more and more she spent drawing. How she loved to draw, or just sitting and dreaming, or when she could, going for walks with her grandfather. One summer day, she and her grandma were walking together in small woods behind their home. It was twilight. The air was sweet and warm. Fireflies were just coming out from the grasses. As they walked, Tricia said, "Grandma, do you think I'm different?" "Of course," her grandma answered. "To be different is the miracle of life. You see, all those little fireflies, each one is different. Do you think I'm smart? Trisha didn't feel smart. Her grandma hugged her. You're the smartest, quickest, dearest little thing ever. Right then and there, the little girl felt safe in her grandma's arms. Reading didn't matter so much. Here she is with her grandma. How many of you have a grandma who makes you feel special? I hope so. Trisha's grandma used to say that the stars were holes in the sky. They were the light of heaven coming from the other side. And she used to say that someday she would be on the other side, where the light comes from. One evening, they lay on the grass together and counted the lights of heaven. You know, her grandma said, all of us will go there someday. Hang on to the grass, or you'll lift right off the ground, and there you'll be. They laughed and both hung on to the grass. But it was not long after that night that her grandma must have let go of the grass because she went to where the lights were on the other side. And not long after that, Trisha's grandpa let go of the grass too. Grandma, school seemed harder and harder now. So what they're saying is grandma and grandpa both passed away. They both died. Reading was just plain torture. Torture means like something really hard. When Sue Ellen read her page or Tommy Bob read his page, they read so easily that Trisha would watch the top of their heads to see if something was happening to their heads that wasn't happening to hers. And numbers were the hardest thing of all to read. She never added anything right. Line the numbers up before you add them, her teacher would say. But when Trisha tried, the numbers looked like a stack of blocks, wobbly and ready to fall. She just knew she was dumb. Then one day, her mother announced that she had gotten a teaching job in California, a long way away from family farm in Michigan. So her mom's a teacher, and they're moving away. So here's her teacher, and there's Trisha in the classroom trying to figure out what is different about these guys and they're being able to read. Even though her grandma and grandpa were gone, the little girl didn't want to move. Maybe, though, the teachers and kids in her new school wouldn't know how dumb she was. She and her mother and brother moved across the country in a two-tone 1949 Plymouth. It took 5 days. But at the new school, it was the same. When she tried to read, she stumbled over words. The cat ran. She was reading like a baby in the third grade. And when her teacher read along with them and called on Trisha for an answer, she gave the wrong answer every time. Hey, dummy, a little boy called out to her in the playground. How come you're so dumb? Other kids stood near him and they laughed. Trisha could feel the tears burning in her eyes. How she longed to go back to her grandparents' farm in Michigan. Here she is, and people are not being very nice to her, are they? Now Trisha wanted to go to school less and less. I have a sore throat, she'd say to her mother, or I have a stomach ache. She dreamed more and more and drew more and more, and she hated school. Then when Trisha started 5th grade, the school was all abuzz. There was a new teacher. He was tall and elegant. Everybody loved his striped coat and slick gray pants. He wore the neatest clothes. All the usual teachers' pets gathered around him. Stevie Joe and Alice Marie and Davy and Michael Lee. But right from the start, it didn't seem to matter to Mr. Falker which kids were the cutest or the smartest or the best at anything. So here he is. Do you see him? Mr. Falker would stand behind Trisha whenever he was drawing and whisper, "This is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Do you know how talented you are?" When he said this, the kids who teased her would turn around in their seats and look at her drawings, but they still laughed whenever she gave the wrong answer. Then one day she had to stand up and read, which she hated. She was stumbling through the words of a page of Charlotte's Web. The page was going all fuzzy when the kids began to laugh out loud. Mr. Falker, in his plaid jacket and his butterfly tie, said, "Stop! Are you all so perfect that you can look at another person and find fault with her?" So he's doing the right thing, isn't he? Because they're not treating people right. He's saying, stop. We don't make fun of someone because they're having a hard time with something. We all have gifts. She's a good artist, isn't she? That was the last day anyone ever laughed out loud or made fun of her, all except Eric. He had sat behind Trisha for 2 whole years, but he seemed almost to hate her. Trisha didn't know why. He waited by the door of the classroom for her and pulled her hair. He waited for her on the playground, leaned in her face and called out, Toad! Trisha was afraid to turn any corner for fear Eric would be there. She felt completely alone. The only time she was really happy was when she was around Mr. Falker. He let her erase the blackboards. Only the best students got to do that. He patted her on the back whenever she got something right, and he looked hard and mean at any kid who teased her. But Mr. Falker's a good guy, isn't he? Kind of like our own Mr. Russell. He's a good guy, too. All of our teachers are good people. But the nicer Mr. Falker was to Tricia, the worse Eric treated her. He got all the other kids to wait on her at the playground or the cafeteria or even in the bathroom and jump out and call her stupid or ugly. And Tricia began to believe them. She discovered that if she asked to go to the bathroom just before recess, she could hide under the inside stairwell during the free time and not go outside at all. In that dark place, she felt completely safe. You see her hiding out? It's important, boys and girls, that we're not mean to other people because words can really hurt, just like something else can hurt. But one day at recess, Eric followed her to her secret hiding place. Have you become a mole? He laughed, and he pulled her out in the hallway and danced around and yelled, Dumbbell, 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 maggoty old dumbbell. Tricia buried her head in her arms and curled up in a ball. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. It was Mr. Falker. He marched Eric down to the office, and when he came back, he found Tricia. I don't think you'll have to worry about that boy again, he said softly. What was it teasing about, little Webb? I don't know, Tricia shrugged. Tricia was sure Mr. Falker believed that she could read. She had learned to memorize what the next kid to her was reading, or she would wait for Mr. Falker to help her with a sentence. Then she would say the same thing that he did. Good, he would say. Then one day, Mr. Falker asked her to stay after school and help wash the blackboards. He put on music and brought out little sandwiches, and they worked and talked. All at once, he said, let's play a game. I'll shout out letters, and you write them on the board with a wet sponge as quickly as you can. A, he shouted, and she wiped out watery A. 8, he shouted, and she wiped a watery 8. 14, 3, D, M, Q, he shouted out. He shouted out many letters and numbers. Then he walked up behind her, and together they looked at the board. It was a watery mess. Tricia knew that none of the letters or numbers looked like they should. She threw the sponge down and tried to run. But Mr. Falker caught her arm and sank to his knees in front of her. You poor baby, he said. You think you're dumb, don't you? How awful for you to be so lonely and afraid, she sobbed. But little one, don't you understand? You don't see letters or numbers the way other people do, and you've got through school all this time and fooled so many good teachers. He smiled at her. Look at that took some cunning and smartness and such bravery. That's a life skill, courage. Then he stood up and finished washing the board. We're going to change that, little girl. You're going to read. I promise you that. Now, almost every day after school, she met with Mr. Falker and Miss Plessy, a reading teacher. They did a lot of things she didn't even understand. At first, she made circles in sand and then big sponge circles on the blackboard, going from left to right and right to left. Going from left to right, left to right. Another day, they flicked letters on the screen, and Tricia shouted them out loud. Still other days, she worked with wooden blocks and built words, letters, words, always sounding them out, and it felt good. But though she'd read words, she hadn't read a whole sentence, and deep down, she still felt dumb. And then one day, in the spring, It had been 3 months since she started. Mr. Falker put a book in front of her. She'd never seen it before. He picked a paragraph in the middle of the page and he pointed at it, almost as if they were magic, or if light poured into her brain. The words and sentences started to take shape on the page as they never had before. She marched them off too slowly. She read a sentence, then another sentence, and another, and finally she read a whole paragraph, and she understood the whole thing. She didn't notice that Mr. Falker and Miss Plessy had tears in their eyes. There she is. She's reading. That night, Tricia ran home without stopping to catch her breath. She bounded up the front steps, threw open her front door, and ran through the dining room to the kitchen. She climbed up on the cupboard and grabbed a jar of honey. Then she went into the living room and found the book on the shelf. The very book that her grandpa had shown her so many years ago. She spooned honey on the cover and tasted the sweetness and said to herself, "The honey is sweet, and so is knowledge, but knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of a book." Then she held the book, honey and all, close to her chest. She could feel tears roll down her cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. She was very, very happy. The rest of the year became an odyssey of discovery and adventure for the little girl. She learned to love school. I know because that little girl was me, Patricia Polacco. I saw Mr. Falker again some 30 years later at a wedding. I walked up to him, introduced myself. At first, he had difficulty placing me. Then I told him who I was and how he had changed my life in so many years ago. He hugged me and asked me what I was doing for a living. "Why, Mr. Falker," I answered, "I make books for children." Thank you, Mr. Falker. Thank you. The author of this book had a hard time reading. She had great teachers who helped her read. She stuck with it. Boys and girls, we are so blessed at Cole Elementary to have great teachers. I hope you feel that way as well, and that you take the time to thank them. Moms and dads, if you're listening, this is Teacher Appreciation Week. Appreciate the teachers. Thank you, Mr. Falker, but thank you also to all the Cole teachers for all you do. I hope you enjoyed the book. Keep reading, okay? It's important. Thank you very much for joining me today.